All right, welcome to your first lesson for Introduction to Statistics. Today, we're going to be talking about organizing data and just getting some of the basic vocabulary down. All right, so our objective today is to apply the basic definitions of statistics. All right, what statistics is trying to do is to study what's going on in the world around us. So there's some sort of information out there, some data, information in a context that we want to know what it's telling us. So statistics is the study of how to collect, organize, analyze, and interpret numerical information from data. We're looking for patterns and departures from the patterns. There's actually two types of data. And remember, data is that information in a context. If you don't have the context, you don't have data. There's two types: quantitative or numerical measurements, and then qualitative or categorical data. Those classifications or categories. So let's see. Let's use woodchucks as our example. Suppose we wanted to know how much wood a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood. The data we would be wanting is the amount of wood the woodchucks are chucking. Statistics would give us the means for doing so by determining the average amount of wood chucked by a woodchuck, as well as how much that amount varies from one critter to the next. If there was no variation, it just wouldn't be a very interesting study. So we need to think about populations and samples. The population is all the subjects of interest. It's often too costly or not feasible. It's really hard to get all the measurements or observations that you would like from the population. So typically what people do is they take a sample from that population. The critical thing is that the sample has to be representative of the population. If it's not representative of the population, then the results of the sample can't be generalized to the population. So how do we get a representative sample? Well, our best chance of getting a representative sample is to use a random sample, a sample that is determined by chance. So that's what we will be doing is we'll be talking about random samples and in an effort to have a representative population. We'll also talk about methods where people don't use random samples and some of the consequences of that. Okay, so back to our woodchuck example. Our population is going to be all woodchucks in the US, and then our sample in an ideal world where we could identify and label all the woodchucks and randomly select 100 of them, we'll have 100 randomly selected woodchucks from all US woodchucks. Okay, so if we want to produce data, we have several choices. One, if we are looking at observing information and recording it and conducting a study that way, one thing we could do is use all the measurements from the population. Again, that is time consuming, expensive, and it's often just not possible because you can't necessarily do it all on one day. And on any given day, people or woodchucks are born and die. The population is kind of fluid. And so it's really hard to get a true census. So it's a lot of people feel it's better to go with scientific sampling. And that is where we're going to use measurements from a subset of the population. Another way to produce data would be through conducting an experiment. And in a statistical experiment, the treatment is deliberately imposed on a subject, and those subjects are assigned to those treatments at random in order to observe a given response. Now, there's another way, it's called simulation. Sometimes you can't conduct the experiment for ethical reasons, or it would be too expensive, or, really bad things can happen if you do the experiment and it goes wrong. And so you'll researchers use simulation. And so that's going to be a numerical facsimile of real world phenomena, often done with software. So they take all the known information and the probabilities of certain events occurring, and they come up with a simulation. Okay, so let's apply this to the woodchucks. We would be conducting a census if we measured the daily woodchucking of all the woodchucks in the US. A sample is if we measured the woodchucking of the 100 woodchucks. An experiment would be if we gave Red Bull to 20 woodchucks and saw how much more wood they chucked that day than their other days where they don't have Red Bull. Simulation would be if we programmed a computer to demonstrate the effects of giving woodchucks steroids to improve their daily woodchucking output. All right, guys, that's it for lesson 1.1. Be ready to do your classwork when you get to class. Remember, you'll have a quiz at the end of class. Notice that this is really vocabulary driven, so you need to think about the kind of study techniques you use for vocabulary driven material versus what you typically do for math classes. All right, guys, have a great day, and I will see you in class.